Alrighty guys, another day, another strength, and we got the last video in this series, my favorite deadlift accessories for strength. So let's get right into it. Number 3, we got squats. So in the squat video, number 3 was the conventional deficit deadlift. For the deadlift video here, we have all kinds of squats. The squats, they train the same muscles as the deadlift. They're very similar movement patterns, as we talked about. The deadlift is concentric only, right? So you're just pushing the floor going up. There's no like down portion. So the squat has a down portion, an eccentric, which is going to train those muscles a little harder, right? Literally twice as hard because you're getting that whole way down, whole way up, and it's a longer range of motion. So it's a very similar movement pattern, but it's a lot harder for those two reasons. So that carries over great. Can be generally trained with more frequency than the deadlift because it's lighter, so you can recover a little bit easier from the squat than the deadlift. So that's another benefit. And then certain variations tend to carry over better than others with the squat. So I will say, my personal experience, I think SSB squats are my favorite. It's very specific in the sense that you're using the upper back, keeping it very tight because the bar is trying to like fold you over and destroy you as you're squatting. The pin squat also, you have to generate a lot of force from a dead stop, specifically the low bar pin squat. It's very, very similar to the starting position of the deadlift. And then I really don't do this one a lot, but the front squat I hear is a pretty good one. It makes perfect sense for the same reasons that the safety bar squat is beneficial. And then those two also, the front squat and safety bar squat, put a heavy emphasis on the quad drive off the floor, which is how you start off a deadlift, right? So you have to use that knee extension to break the bar off the floor. Number 2, I have 2 movements here because they're almost the same. The good morning and the Romanian deadlift. So I would give the edge to the RDL if I had to pick one because it's more specific to the deadlift, but they're both like basically the same thing. They work the heck out of the spinal erectors and the hamstrings. And then similar to the squat, they both include an eccentric and a concentric. And then the real benefit of these is that they're very specific to the deadlift, but they use like, if you're using a good morning, it's like a third of the weight of a deadlift. And then if you're using the RDL, it's, you know, like half to maybe 3/4, so still less, which solves that recovery problem. But yeah, number 1, my personal favorite, is the deficit deadlift. Deficit deadlifts, my 100% favorite, because they have 100% carryover to the deadlift, right? So just like the other movements, the other videos, you can replace the deadlift with the deficit deadlift and just train exclusively those and your deadlift is going to go up. It's got a longer range of motion compared to the deadlift, and it's just a harder version of the deadlift, which works great, and I love it. But yeah, deadlift falls between the bench and the squat as far as movements, as far as the carryover from the movements to them. So the bench, you have tons of movements that carry over. Squat, there are fewer. And then press is like over here with like very few. Deadlift is somewhere in the middle of that, right? So some of the honorable mentions, we've got rack pulls and halting deadlifts, which I think people love in general, especially in the starting strength world. The downsides to these, in my opinion, are that they take a good bit of time to actually get to the point where they're hard enough, because there's some experimentation with finding out where the rack pull should go as far as like, you know, if you put it too high, it's not training the hardest part of the lift. If you put it too low, it's not different enough from a deadlift. So if that, it takes time to get that set. So if it doesn't actually work and you just spend all that time trying to set it up, then you're in big trouble. And then the other downside is that it does not play well with other lifts. So you have to replace the deadlift with the rack pull and the halting. You can't do both simultaneously unless you do the deadlifts like super light, but then if the rack pull is not working, then you're losing strength on the deadlift and losing time. So these other movements that I laid out, right, you can all program them with these other movements simultaneously. So that way if they don't work, at least you have other movements that are working simultaneously. So you have to put too many eggs in that one basket, I think. Next honorable mention is all pulls, right? So we have rows, we have chin-ups, we have lat pull downs. Specifically cheat rows I like a lot. So like the Penlay row, the Dr. deadlift, he calls it the deadlift row. Those I think work great. And then we also have all kinds of isolation leg work and machine leg work. So I think that leg presses and hack squats are going to carry over to your deadlift because the movement pattern is less difficult. Contrary to popular belief, deadlifting is just not that hard, right? If you can do it, then you can spend less time with it. That's why people can do it once a week or once every other week and still make progress on it. What tends to not work are any kind of dumbbell deadlift. So like, you know, dumbbell RDLs, single leg dumbbell RDLs. Those can be great for just working the hamstrings and the glutes and building some muscle. But I find that they are not as beneficial for the deadlift because you can get the same thing from an RDL and then you're still going to recover pretty well from RDL or good morning, right? So there's just not really much reason to use the dumbbells. And then you have the wide stance sumo deadlift. This one does not carry over very well. I've never experimented with a more narrow sumo stance, but I've heard that can work for conventional deadlifts. But the wide stance powerlifting sumo for sure does not work because it's basically just like a partial that's not specific to the conventional deadlift. So you're training very little range of motion and not even the same muscle mass really. But yeah, that's really it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, say something in the comments and I'll see you in the next video. All right, goodbye.